So we haven't got very long. We've got an awful lot to talk about. But I want to talk about now, the current... Now, you've just done that track
Yeah.
with Greta Thunberg, which is... You can't get any more current than that, can you? And your band has always been very good at embracing the moments, political, social, cultural. This is just a latest example of that. So do you want to tell me how that came about, why you did it?
Well, it's interesting because that is actually, I suppose, in terms of what we normally do, I mean, our stuff is more like direct, sort of confrontational stuff, you know, anti-fascist, education stuff at a grassroots thing. We've never really gone to the green environmental thing. Well, we did do one track called Flyover, which is quite a big tune, but weirdly it ended up on a video game about driving, you know.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, but hey, that's what you want, you know. I had a track called Youthquake that our manager said, why haven't you done anything with this? It was actually a tribute to the Grime for Corbyn movement, which actually I think is ADF's original outlook in essence, you know. But and our manager Bobby said, well, why don't you, have you seen Greta Thunberg? Why don't you put the voice on that track? And I had read about her, but I hadn't actually listened to her, and her voice is amazing. She's one of these people that just barely opens her mouth, and it's like a goddess talking, you know, but a very vengeful goddess, you know. So the music is all really explosive. I put together a video very quickly. And what I wanted to do is make sure that the actual, the cataclysm that she's warning about, that we still feel that. And the problem with now is that she can be reduced to some kind of meme that's easily patronized or actually attacked in the most ugly way. So we wanted to retain the actual power of the words when she says things like, change is coming whether you like it or not. I mean, it's a finger-pointing moment. It's not, you know, it's not, oh, please, yes, let's be nice to everybody and whatever. It's actually quite threatening, and I like that. You know, I think that's been lost a bit. So hopefully the track keeps that sort of militancy and cataclysmic catastrophism going.
You made it. I'm amazed you made your way through that phrase. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I didn't.
What was interesting about that track is you've always been a politically activated band. It's not the whole picture, of course.
No.
People always go, oh, bands aren't politically... There's not much political activity in music anymore, which is not true either. But what interests me is the fact that someone like Greta, a 16-year-old girl from Sweden, can have a massive worldwide impact, get millions of people on the streets. Yesterday, they had kids from Palestine and Israel protesting together on that cause, which I thought was a really powerful statement in a lot of different ways. But does it make bands almost redundant that a 16-year-old with social networking can actually have a more powerful impact than you ever can with a song?
Well, do you know, I don't care. If we're talking about actual, if we're saying we're using something to raise consciousness and, you know, make some change, make some difference, then who cares what the format is? We'll supplement it, you know what I mean? It's not an ego thing. I don't think, well, more bands should be running this.
Does it change your role in a way? One time, when I was growing up, that's where the interesting debate was. It was never in mainstream politics. It was always in music, wasn't it? Even if we misinterpreted it, we believed it was in music. You probably did as well. You're slightly younger than me, but you're still in that era, that time.
Our thing is we make the music first. You know, the music is first. That's the lens whereby we perceive it. We're not like old Stalinists or whatever who say, well, you serve the line of the party. Well, I'm not anyway. There have been arguments along these lines, but I'm definitely at music first.
A band that argues about what it's about is a strong band, though.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it was a very argumentative band, extremely. Yeah. So and the world saw that, I think. Yeah.
So do you think the role of what you do as a musician may have changed in the last 4 or 5 years?
It might have done, but I mean, I don't think we can be actually, you know, reductive about what a role of a musician should be. You know, in a way, when it comes to music, I don't like the word should. You know, it's often put to us like, oh, well, do you think all musicians should be saying this or should be doing that? I don't like the word should. I just think any artist, music, whatever, should be true to themselves and what they actually express. Now, that might seem a bit sort of glib, but actually it isn't, because most artists and musicians do censor themselves all the time, more than ever now, in order to, and in a way I don't, you know, I have sympathy for them. You know, if the entire music industry is, you know, underwritten by certain sponsors, you know, not all of whom are bad, but mostly are, then artists tend to censor themselves, you know, in that context. You can see that, you know what I mean? And also the other way, you know, something like grime or hip-hop, you know, people realise that the most transgressive and violent and sort of, you know, lyrics and whatever, or a personality is going to get to the top in that system, you know. So in a way, that's a form of self-censorship as well, you know. So truth, that's all that matters. Be true to yourself, express what you feel. If you do want to see some injustice or anything you feel about, you should write about it as an artist. If you don't.
I mean, do you feel in a way that you've been lucky, that you've been given a space where you can express all this? Like you say, other artists have a pressure on them to succeed, that they can't say what they feel, or maybe not that interested anyway, or maybe they deal with different kind of emotions or subjects. So do you feel that you're lucky to have that platform, especially because France embraced you really early on? You sold so many records there.
Of course. Lucky to be doing music at all. You know, lucky to do that platform. You know, lucky that I've been able to do this for 25 years, you know, and not really make any musical compromises. But that, I think, is about the way we came to it all, you know. There was no plan to get public profile or be success to make it. You know, we started as an education project. It just so happened that what came out of that project, especially at that time in the mid-90s, when it was Britpop or whatever, you know, we actually came up with a sound that was derived from a completely different set of social circumstances. We were an alliance of youth workers, music education people like myself, and the youth that came to the workshop. And we were orientating it towards kids of an Asian background because they were basically getting shat on very badly in the early 90s, especially where we were in East London, you know. And that's how the group came about, and that's how its sound evolved. So you had old post-punk musicians like myself. I say old because the kids we were working with were like 14, 15, you know. And Dr. Das, you know, we were kind of like reggae, post-punk, people who'd got into electronics, acid house, been through all that. And then we were talking to like 13, 14-year-old, mainly Bangladeshi youth, and it was wall-to-wall jungle, which I still maintain was the most exciting music of that era. And yet what we would be having pushed down our throats? Britpop. So we were automatically driven. We were fundamentally oppositional. We were against the racism in East London. We were against the musical, you know, conservatism and reactionary kind of elements that were actually preventing a great new inner city music being heard. But we were also connected to punk, post-punk, reggae, of course, and dub reggae. So there's this big melange. And we wanted to continue, and we did continue, the educational aspects of what we did. We didn't make a separation. You know.
So how much of an impact did you have on the streets? You know, the projects you're working on, the educational thing. How much of a difference does that make? I mean, it's a lot of time I always think political and social initiative in music, they're kind of they're brilliant ideas, but they're up here. But when you get down here, people aren't listening. But you actually are in a unique position where you're actually with the people who should be listening. And were they listening? Did it make an impact?
It is a very good question. It depends how you want to quantify that. If one person ended up like, say, our current singer now, who a lot of his friends are in prison or on heroin or something like that, and he's travelled the world as a vocalist, you know, I mean, and a very conscious person, very much involved in Palestinian rights, and particularly, it's like that. Well, that's enough. Do you know what I mean? But there's a whole host of other things as well. Just the opportunity, people getting a chance. You see, because in a way, it's a bit of a dated model, what we had at the time. Because now, what we were teaching people to do, they can do it on their phones now. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I was an expert in MIDI cabling. Yeah. You know, what use is that to someone with an Xbox? So, but, you know, if you think about some of the places that where I actually did the workshops, while ADF was in formation, and where we drew material from, things like the Asian Drugs Project in Turnpike Lane, there's like police station across the road, and they're involved in the crack dealing on the green. You know, these are the kind of places. So I don't know how you want to quantify it, John. It's like I had 3 people in that place come to one of my workshops. We had a whole load of kids, and we made a jungle rhythm and a bass line, and they're all dancing, going crazy, and they said, what should we call it? And there's a cartoon on the wall, and it says, the judge says all Asians look the same. And so I've got like 10, sort of 13-year-olds goes, judge say all Asians look the same. And this high-speed jungle thing going on. I mean, and it was a new music. That was the sound of ADF. That's where it came from. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know how you want to quantify the success or failure or whatever. That seems to me, just that moment is a success.
No, I mean, I don't expect... No, it's unfair to expect any musician to have that amount of effect. You could change everything. Yeah. I'm just interested in what kind of things do change, you know?
Okay, well, I'm asked this a lot. You've asked it in a far more eloquent way than you usually get.
You're just being a creep now.
It's like a, can music change the world kind of question, you know what I mean? You know, I normally have a few answered. Well, in our case, the Free Satpal Ram campaign, Satpal is out of prison, okay? You can debate how much putting the record out or raising consciousness for the campaign, how much that effect that had, or how much effect, like London Records, spending the money to put 20,000 posters up to advertise the single with Free Satpal Ram. Now, that's a victory in any, I think, you know. I'm very proud of that. You know, I mean, they were just doing it as a commercial thing, but the actual effect was, you know, it was reorientated. Things like, when I think about the band Tinaru, and I don't know whether you've heard of them, you know, well, you should. You know, I mean, they're amazing.
Amazing,
you know?
yeah.
That whole scene is amazing.
Yeah.
Now, I was a presenter for a program that came out on Al Jazeera English. They didn't make it; they commissioned it, and it was called Music of Resistance. And basically, the kind of thing we'd set up in London, which was ADF education, we were looking for things in other parts of the world that were similar. Now, these guys in Mali, in Tinaran, they were guerrilla fighters, basically, and they recruited for the guerrilla army using cassettes of their music. That was the beginning of them.
Because their music was so seductive.
Yeah.
I see that working.
Yeah, but it was actually, they used to distribute the cassettes to say, we are meeting in this place and that we're going to go and attack the army garrison. Yeah. You know what I mean? Now, whatever you think about it, it's obviously complex. You know, I'm not going to make a judgment on that. But it's pretty impressive. But that had a huge effect on Mali. And it had a huge effect on the nature of the state in Mali, you know? Another example that I think, I mean, you probably remember, I'm sure a lot of you remember, how obsessed with the monarchy Britain was, you know, like in the 70s. I mean, it was just like, to say anything against the monarchy was like some kind of thought crime, you know what I mean? And I'm convinced that God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols, you know, had a huge influence on the national consciousness. People were more critical of the monarchy at that moment, far less kind of almost obsessively deferential, you know. So I think these are the kind of ways that music works, you know, and I think we were in
almost like
those traditions.
Just posting ideas out there, you know, not necessarily changing everything, but making people change the way of thinking.
But who does, what does change anything? I mean, it's all a whole huge steps of very complex processes.
But again, go back to the first thing, that Greta Thunberg, virtually probably one Facebook post just changed so much. It's the power of communications in different places, isn't it? And I'm not saying that makes music redundant. I'm going back to earlier questions.
Part of it, you know.
Yeah, what the role of a musician is now I think has changed from say 30, 40 years
Now,
ago.
you know what? If you'd have said about 3 or 4 years ago, I would have agreed. I would have said, well, musicians are not. One thing that's so true, and it has this kind of like upside and downside. You know, musicians are not cultural leaders in the West, right? When you're looking for an opinion or perspective on things, I don't think many people take musicians seriously. And why should they? You know, like in the 60s, you had Lennon and Dylan. Now, Lennon, who did all those ridiculous things with Yoko Ono, was seen as a cultural leader, you know. Or someone like Bob Dylan was seen as a cultural leader who ran away, you know, and didn't want to know, you know. So maybe, you know, that's a good thing in some ways, but like that they're not considered cultural leaders. But I think the grime for Corbyn, whatever your particular opinion on Corbyn or whatever, the fact is, out of this very grassroots music, actually had, and there's debate about it, but I looked into it, statistically, it had an electoral effect. on the last election. Now,
Made
we never
people-
got anywhere near that, you know.
So it's kind of embracing people who felt disenfranchised, the people beyond the political system.
Yeah, and I was amazed because even myself, I said I could never see something, as much as I love it sonically, I never thought this me against the world or against you kind of vibe, no matter how artistically good it is, and I think it can be. I never thought that would actually translate into something very tangible, a movement which actually affected affected things electorally, and that's amazing. To be honest, that was ADF's aim in a nutshell, to actually help or facilitate, to mobilise something that actually makes a difference. You know,
And in a way, you're part of that process, aren't you? So that's important.
Well, maybe, yeah.
I mean, maybe not the ones at the top with the megaphone, but somewhere in the middle. Creating an idea, a space where somebody can actually think of the next bit. That's important as well, isn't
I
it?
think that's what it's all about. Yeah. But at the same time, you know, I do want to emphasise, you know, it's the music first. It's music with a capital M, you know. But I actually think this makes for good music. Do you know what I mean? It's like that whole thing I was talking about, say, in the music workshop. I think we made a very distinct sound because of it. I think this positivity and this sort of energy, mobilisational energy, can make for great music, you know, and the two can work hand in hand, you know. So I think where some people always got us wrong, or said, oh well, you know, which is more important, music or politics or something, you know what I mean? And you know, music which is political can be absolute crap. Yeah, you know, we used to get given CDs and say, oh, you like this because it's about this and this. No, we don't like it. It's rubbish.
Yeah.
It's got to be musically good. Yeah. You know, sometimes, even the opposite, sometimes music can mobilise and change ideas or help to change ideas, and the people doing it are conservative, like as Stooges or something like that. Do you know what I mean?
No,
you know what I'm saying?
It's disappointing how many of our
Marky
icons
Smith, you know,
are actually on the wrong side of the equation.
They're on the wrong side when they talk and whatever, but their music is still
beautiful music. Yeah. Separate the art from the artist. Difficult.
You can. I think you can to a degree.
Yeah. We don't want to put Morrison into this conversation, do we?
No, but I never liked him anyway, so I'm all right.
So that was your get-out clause. For his fans, it's a very, very difficult conversation.
Yes, I bet, yeah.
Especially because so many fans bought into him because of what he stood for. I mean, that could be a problem for you as well, can't it? That, you know, maybe as they get older and they get a bit more conservative, they think, well, I used to like them, but they just ranting away at me. I don't really like it now. I mean, you find those people. I mean,
that may have happened.
Even a young man like yourself is getting older, you know, and you know, and you find your audience probably getting more settled down and changing as well.
Oh wow! You know, I've never actually been asked a question like that. So think about it.
You get to an age where that gets asked. Yeah.
Well, okay, I'll give you an example of that. Actually, a very interesting example, because the track that I told you about, and a couple of tracks, got on video games in the mid-2000s. So we played a couple of shows, one WOMAD and another festival. And it was really weird when we came on stage, because these were kind of world music festivals. And the rest of the music, some nice stuff, but it was all quite friendly, you know, light music. And by that time, I think by the 2000s, the festival-going audience, the parents that were bringing their children had got to sort of like 14, 15. So there's this weird thing when we came on stage, all the parents went to the back, and all these like 15-year-olds were at the front for our show. Yeah. And because they knew the video games, and they just went nuts when we did the video songs, and they liked the rest. But we were as old as their parents.
Yeah.
Right? And their parents standing at the back going, well, I can't wait for the next, you know, folk music act on. So I think you're right, but it's actually a bit more of a complex picture.
So that audience, they come to you. They come to you very differently. They don't come to you with the political social baggage. They just like the tune they heard in a computer game.
Yeah, but if they go into the
valid.
song,
Of course, it's valid. Yeah.
Like Fortress Europe, you know, which keeps going viral at different times. You know, like the day Brexit was, you know, happened, and then the dreadful story of the immigrant kid dying on the beach. You know, but we wrote that song in 2001, you know, and it keeps changing its meaning for the worse. I'd rather...
It was like a nostalgic piece. Look what it was like in those days.
I'd rather that, but it's got worse, and people say it's prophetic. And, I mean, I wrote the words for that based on a film that I saw, you know, and I'd rather not written such prophetic lyrics. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, yeah, it's a fairly dark world viewpoint. I mean, things aren't great. But do you feel optimistic or pessimistic about the future?
Well, that's a great question as well. I was having this conversation the other day, actually, because it's easy to be a grump, isn't it, about technology? I mean, I think, I wouldn't call myself a Marxist, but I actually say that Karl Marx had something pretty right, which is that technology and development rewires our consciousness. I think only a fool would pretend that what's happened in the past 15, 16 years has not rewired our consciousness. And we are actually seeing some very negative outpourings of that transition at the moment. You know, I mean, why have we got Brexit? Why have we got this resurgence of the right, which has all come online? It's because people don't have to self-censor themselves in a civil situation anymore. And then they can find other people. Do you know what I mean? So it's a basic sort of like break in our personalities being conditioned by our exchange, by our social exchange. Do you know what I mean? And that's purely because of the technology. Do you know what I mean? So I'm pessimistic about that in the short term. But I actually think the next generation coming up, having been born in that, will come up with a whole new, fresh set of ideas and perspectives. And maybe, even though it's a limited social group, the Extinction Rebellion and Greta Thunberg is the first sign of that. And there is a parallel you can make, right? Say the 60s, the ideas that evolved in the 60s. You know, the generation gap in the 60s between, well, we're talking about Western countries, obviously, between the youth and their parents was fucking huge. You know what I mean? And that's partly because they were brought up with TV, right? TV, and they had money in their pockets so they could buy like clothes and records the way that their parents hadn't done before. And a lot of that was positive, you know.
Buy time to think.
Yes,
yeah, which I think
time
made a
to
difference.
think, yeah. So I'm optimistic with that as a kind of reference point, that a group of youth, young people who have grown up in a world that is so technologically different, there might be a whole set of new kind of progressive ideas that comes out of it, as has happened before.
It was interesting, the first debate on Friday in here, it was John Briggs, I think, I can't remember the name exactly, but he's written a book about being optimistic about the future.
Yeah.
All those things you talk about there, the under-25s, next generation, very different mindset.
Yeah.
And in a way, our generation, and I think we're close in generation, it's actually been a disappointment. Do you think that? I feel that quite a lot, actually. We went through so much. Through the punk thing, through all these things, through all these great ideas, and ended up being quite conservative, which is, we've been outmanoeuvred by the under-25s, which is great.
Well, I hope so,
Yeah.
I hope so. But, I mean, it's like what you got to ask, what we got to be careful, and I can see that with, say, like the Remain side in Brexit and Extinction Rebellion and all these, it's like there's this huge mass of people who are not particularly, you know, they were never interested in punk or whatever, you know what I mean? They were, you know, and they exist, and someone like you and me doesn't have any communication with them, even though we might have them in our family or what have you. Which
Are you
is
sure
like,
about that? Because I always think as a musician, yes, on one level you live in a bubble, rehearsal rooms, media, but really with musicians, and I'm sure you're a musician who's somebody after a gig will speak to everybody in the crowd. You probably sit in a bus and talk to everybody in the bus. We live in lots of different little worlds, actually. We can't have that luxury of not having just meeting 10 people in a month. It's 10,000, isn't it? So in a way, you're quite a good barometer of what's going on out there.
I don't know, John. I think that's a very interesting. I mean, how do you measure that? You know,
you can't measure it, but you do meet a lot of people as you wander about the world. I'm sure you don't seem like the kind of person who sits on their own with the headphones on a train.
Yeah, I'm coming at it from a slightly different way, because my mum was very English white working class. Left school at 14, packed biscuits on an assembly line. Do you know what I mean? And my dad worked in a factory which was full of, you know, really some of the worst versions of the white work, some of the best as well, of course, of the white working class, that horrible sort of demographic phrase. And so when all my friends were saying, oh, no, Brexit's going to lose, you know, everyone's going to vote to Remain, so I said no, because, you know, I grew up with a lot of people, or my brother and my father particularly, sort of were surrounded by people who you knew, they were in the majority. There was a lot more of them, and we was kind of surrounded by them. And I can see it, you know, I can feel it in the air. Do you know what I mean? And I knew that Brexit was going to win because of that. And that's what I'm saying, that there is a lot of people who are just simply living in a different world and a different set of perceptions. And it's almost like a lot of people who might think generally the same way of us, it's almost become so polarized that we sort of can't even have any communication.
But that's kind of what I was saying, because you knew that. Because you go over different places, different bubbles in a way, because they're all bubbles, aren't they?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
I mean, do you find, as someone who's a communicator, you're very good at communicating on stage, in interview, do you think the so-called whatever liberal left is a fuzzy space, but they've lost the communicators?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Do you think too many of the communicators, youth worker, should have been a representative of your community, you just got dragged away by rock and roll? Do you think too many of the people should have been representing the liberal viewpoint, whatever it is, it's a broad phrase, but you just spent your life in rehearsal rooms writing beats instead of like changing the world?
Well, I don't think we did, but then again, I think all the people that we work with, like inner city youth, working with people in favelas in Brazil and things like, all tended to agree with us anyway. Do you know what I mean? That's why we made the connections. I actually think that we, musically, people used to accuse us preaching to the converted. I actually think a lot of the indie crowds we played to were not converted, actually.
No, you find that as the years go by.
Yeah, and I actually think that we actually did. We actually brought a lot of people to us and our perspective through playing at the gigs with, say, Primal Scream and Rage Against the Machine and things like that, by people who are actually quite a long way from our worldview.
But why somebody who's obviously is politically motivated, in a way, interested, that's enough, socially motivated, why are you doing music and why are you not doing politics? What's the thing about politics that's so tainted that we can't go near it anymore?
Well, I'll tell you what, that's a great question. In fact, that's what I was going to start with this, because in the programme it says I'm an activist. No, I ain't. I'm a musician. Because I don't like sitting in meetings taking minutes. I don't like putting leaflets through doors. I'm not very good at it. Unfortunately, being an activist is a skill in itself. There are some people that are very good at it, and herein lies a bit of a danger, actually. It's like some people are good at chairing meetings. Some people can sit through meetings and stuff like that. I'm politically motivated, but I don't want to do that kind of politics. And that is, but I love music. I love music more than anything. And that's my route in.
So it's actually the political process is so dull, almost deliberately dull, that it shut out all the people who can
It is deliberately dull. That is so true, yeah. It is deliberately dull, yeah.
And because...
Or it has been, up to, unfortunately now it's not, but it's the far right on their vlogs and whatever that are making it more exciting. Do you know what I mean? And then that's another thing that people aren't watching, especially with young people.
Do you think they've been smarter at making a pop culture version of 21st century politics than the left have?
Yes, they have.
Yeah.
Absolutely, 100%. And I'm really glad you said that.
Yeah.
Because the music history class that I teach, which is like, 18 to 25-year-olds, we do some wicked stuff, the origins of funk and origins of reggae, origins of punk, everything, And I've noticed that stuff filtering in, people quoting from people, like the far-right bloggers, like, I don't know, people on Fox News, somebody talking about, Kanye West is actually speaking to me, and I think Trump is actually more on the side of black people than the liberal left and what have you. That's all seeping in, right? And no one's really noticing it, right? And there's a whole culture that is actually, it's not the 20 to 30 range, it's actually the 16 to 20, early 20s that are actually, there may be a new counterculture emerging that is of the right,
When the revolution came, it was a wrong revolution.
Yeah. Well, you think about it, it's all like, what's going on at the moment, what Farage is doing is deliberately besmirching all aspects of the British Constitution and British institutions, you know what I mean? In a way that people from the left might have done, but coming from completely the other side.
So in a way, you end up having to protect the things that you were against in the first place.
You know what? Yeah, a bit, yeah, which has freaked me out massively.
What do you think of people like Magic Majid, the ex-mayor of Sheffield? Do you know much
about
him?
Yeah, I saw a little bit, but I don't know that much.
Because that's a guy, obviously, doesn't do the paperwork of the committee meetings, but cuts through the crap. Is that a future for the liberal left? People like that? The Mavericks waking up and finally getting in there.
I probably think so, because in a way, you know, I mean, one thing that people don't understand about Trump, you know, I mean, you still see it now, all the major media outlets don't get him. He's a transgressive person, and that's what works on reality television, right? And when you actually sort of like, when people don't know the difference between politics and reality television, then they're obviously going to go for someone. You know, I mean, who is it? You know, who became famous on reality television? It wasn't people who made rational arguments in the Big Brother chair, was it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was, no, the one who was screwing so-and-so while someone else watched or what have you, and it's on the front page of The Sun. I mean, it's, and he wasn't the first as well. Berlusconi got there before Trump by doing the same things. The man who came up with housewife strip and what have you. It's a basis that you can build politics on, a political career on, or mask another agenda, is bullshit reality television, you know? And people seem to have missed that, you know? That's all he is, Trump. Not much else. A hidden agenda for, well, it's not even hidden, you know, a plus reality television bullshit, and that's what we're fighting against. And actually, maybe musicians, maybe more maverick people you're talking about, people who have real maverick personalities, coming from the other side are the ones to, you know, fight against it.
But how do you counter that when you're a musician? I mean, in a way, you can't compete with reality TV because it's so dumbed down that you almost seem like some kind of weird, sort of like classical music would have seemed like when we were 16. You know, it would seem like quite an earnest culture. You know, do you find that a problem?
Well, I don't know, because I thought we had a sound that could enliven people and excite people, and that's why, you know, we were more popular in France and Japan. People didn't understand the text; they got the feeling. Do you know what I mean? And if it's exciting and enlivening, and anybody of any perspective can come and just feel it in their guts, that is really, I think, that's the real power of music, pushing things on. You know, which is why I said that people who are the artists themselves can be conservative, but they can still move society on with their music, because music hits you viscerally and it hits you emotionally, hits you in the ether, you know. And I think that's its real power. And that's why the sound is so important, you know. You know,
the
not
sound
more than the
is
text.
actually the political statement.
Yeah, you see, you know, a lot of our set is instrumental, always has been, and people never seem to notice that. You know what I mean? But you know, but that just had as strong as message as anything else. And also just seeing us doing what we're doing as well is a strong thing, you know. Better than listening to the records. Yeah, it's always been a better live band. Everyone knows that, you know.
Most great music works better in live.
Yeah.
The communal thing of it is
the
powerful.
best experience is still live, you know. Which is why it's become more popular in a way, you know, because everyone can access the rest of it like that. But live, that moment, it's still precious. You know.
So when you go back to the communities you grew up in, say 20, 30 years ago now, what the changes? Is everything really changed, or is everything still, the core of it still very similar? Or is it decimated?
Here's one thing where I will concur with what you implied earlier. You know, I've never really been a person who is a spokesperson for a community or
but observational, I think.
Yeah, I think so. It depends where you're coming in, you know. I mean, in a way, it seemed a bit simpler, say, from the late 70s, 80s. It was anti-racist and racist. Do you know what I mean? Then you've got huge new cleavages that have come in. We kind of did a song about it called Zigzag Nation. It's like, it used to just be straight lines dividing people, you know. But now it's huge zigzags, you know. So, like, you get crazy statistics like, you know, like the Bangladeshi and Pakistani communities, along with the white working class and Afro-Caribbeans, though less so, are on the bottom of the educational ladder, whereas at the top are Indians and Nigerians. And you see what I mean? So you've got all these kind of different cutting things, and of course Islamophobia, you know, cuts another way. And also now you've got a huge cultural class divide, which is intensified, which is what I'm talking about, the people who voted Brexit and the Remainers. It's not just a political decision that divides it, it's actually a real cultural divide that is so much more...
Can't be repaired, that's the problem.
Well, yeah.
Generations
you may be right, yeah.
So
that's what I'm pessimistic about.
Yeah, I'm trying to be optimistic, because I think pessimism is a great weapon of the right, isn't it?
It is, yeah, okay. Pretend I didn't say that.
No, but you have to look at things with reality, and then you have to try and
you're right.
try and find a solution somehow.
Yeah.
So actually, it's a little side thing. But why the Bangladeshis at the bottom of the education?
Oh,
thing?
wow! You want to go there? I mean, it's like where people are plonked, where they end up, the supportive nature of it, and also the background they came from. I mean, the Indian community is largely, not myself, but it's largely from a Gujarat background, and they were from a more lower middle class background in India. It's the same with the difference between the Nigerian community. It sounds very crude, all this stuff, but it's the only information I've got. The Nigerians more recent Nigerian immigration is from a middle class.
Okay.
Whereas Afro-Caribbean was actually quite lower middle class because they could read and write. The ones that came over on the Windrush, But then they were sort of knocked down by the racism of the 60s and 70s, where the Nigerians have fought from a middle class background, and of course there've been a lot of battles fought since then. So that's what I would, you can find all these social reasons as to why there's this differential achievements across different social groups, but ultimately they are divisive. So the picture is more complex than it was, say, when we started ADF even. And certainly, as you remember, the whole Rock Against Racism thing and what have you, it's very easy to say who's on your side and who's not,
Okay, so that's a really fascinating conversation, especially for this Sunday morning. It's better than Pocket Andrew Marr, actually. But finally, I just want to know what you're up to with the bands and what plans have you got for the rest of this year.
Oh, well, we've actually had a little bit of a renaissance. I'm really happy about it. We are actually featuring in a museum. I'm not sure that's the best thing to be in rock and roll.
It comes to everybody.
A museum, but a fantastic exhibition in Paris, which we hope will come to Britain. It's called Music Migrations, and it actually started. Well, the exhibition started literally the Monday after we were meant to leave the EU, which I'm sure was intentional in France, But it's in a wonderful museum called the Museum of Immigration, which used to be the Museum of the French Empire, right? And it's the most amazing building. I don't know whether many people in Britain have seen it. People in Paris obviously know about it, in France. It's the most incredible building, but they've taken over a huge part of it, right, to the impact of immigration on music from the 1950s to the 90s in Paris and London, right?
Wow, that sounds amazing.
First thing you go in, you see the Equals doing Police on My Back on a big screen, right? You see Millie Small doing My Boy Lollipop. Then the next room, you've got all the French African stuff, Manu Dibango and all these people. And we've got a section as well, which is incredibly gratifying, and it's incredible. It's huge, right? And I don't think I've ever seen anything like that on that scale, I would really check it out. I'll tell you what, the hotels around that are really cheap, right? That's a big plug for Paris, right?
And how long's the exhibition on for?
It's until January.
To January,
Yeah, and hopefully, we hope it's going to come to London.
But if not, just go to Paris and watch it.
Yeah, but also we did a live soundtrack there. One of our, that we did La Haine for many years.
Yeah.
We revived our Battle of Algiers one there. While all that stuff was going on in Algiers, which is an incredible coincidence. We did it at the museum.
Was that for the remake of Battle of Algiers or the original? Did they not remake it? Or?
I don't think they remade it. Well,
it's actually the original.
Yeah. What we do is we rescore the original film from 1966.
Yeah. It's one hell of a film.
Oh, it's unbelievable. I mean, so it was great to do that, and it was really, our version of it is really heavy. It's probably the heaviest thing we've done for it, because the film is heavy,
And it's an amazing film because it looks like a documentary. It's all acted. I can never get my head around that.
No, but the great thing about that film is why they still use it, right? They used it in the Pentagon during the Iraqi invasion. They obviously didn't learn anything.
Wow.
Because it's actually, what's interesting is whereas we get terrorists, blah, blah, you see the logic of how a situation unfolds and how the sides escalate with each other. That's what's the great thing about that. So we actually did that at the museum. So I'm really hoping we're doing it again. We're doing like a 10-day tour of La Haine, the other one we do. And we recently re-released Rafi's Revenge. An absolutely beautiful. I mean, I didn't have much to do with it. You know what I mean? Because, and then when I got it, I went, oh yeah, You know, I love gatefold sleeves. We were too late to have gatefold sleeves in the 90s, you know. So finally it's in a gatefold sleeve on double white vinyl, you know, 12-inch vinyl, like metal box, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's been out, and that's been really gratifying because a lot of the reviews and reception of it has been really great, and I actually think it sounds as good. I'm hypercritical of our stuff. I was really happy to listen to it again and think that it sounds, in some ways, it sounds even better now. Some of the intensity of the lyrics and the subjects, they kind of feel more right now. In a way, the 90s feel quite benign compared to now.
It was a warm-up.
Yeah, it was.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, it was. I know. I'm saying that. And also, I think the lyrical stuff at the time was, because we'd come from that grassroots junglist inner city thing, for a lot of the sort of more indie crowd that came to see us, that was a bit much for them. But after 10, 15 years of grime, it's not anymore, you know. And so that's actually what makes it quite contemporary sound, because that fast-paced delivery, everyone's kind of used to it now, and maybe they weren't in 98, you know. So yeah, and then we've got load of festivals as usual, you know what I mean, Boomtown, and great one up in Scotland, Doing the Rabbit Hole, which is about the best name I've ever heard, you know.
Yeah.
And a load of European stuff, and I think I mentioned, a proper 10-day tour of La Haine in November.
Excellent. Busy.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks to Chandrasonic. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. Nice one, John.